The U.S. Navy first learned something was terribly wrong in the dark waters around Guadalcanal. American cruisers, steaming confidently through the night, suddenly erupted in fountains of fire. Ships that should have been safely out of range were being torn open by explosions so violent that entire compartments vanished in seconds. Officers on the bridge stared in disbelief. Their charts said the Japanese couldn't possibly hit them from that distance. Their doctrine said no torpedo in the world could travel that far. And yet the ocean kept erupting. At first, American commanders blamed luck, or hidden submarines, or even friendly fire. They refused to believe what their lookouts were reporting. Long white trails cutting through the moonlit water at impossible speed, heading straight toward their ships. No one in Washington wanted to admit it, but something was wrong. Very wrong. The Japanese had a weapon the Allies didn't understand. A weapon no intelligence report had predicted. Something far deadlier than anything in their own arsenal. Throughout 1942 and 1943, American ships in the Solomon Islands kept dying the same way. Swiftly, violently, and without warning. Cruisers were broken in half. Destroyers disappeared in pillars of flame. Even battleships found themselves under sudden, unexpected attack. Survivors spoke of torpedoes that seemed to come from nowhere, traveling so far and so fast that maneuvering was almost pointless. The pattern was unmistakable, and yet no one knew how the Japanese were doing it. The secret was the Type 93, nicknamed by the Allies only after the war as the Long Lance. It was a torpedo unlike anything the world had ever seen. Longer, heavier, sleeker, driven not by compressed air but by pure oxygen, giving it a range that should have been impossible. American torpedoes could barely reach 6,000 yards. The Long Lance could travel more than 20,000. It was the difference between a thrown spear and an artillery shell. But the true genius of the weapon was its invisibility. Unlike Allied torpedoes, which left bubbles and wakes that lit up the water like chalk lines, the Long Lance left almost nothing behind. Fired at night, it moved like a ghost. Only the faintest shimmer on the surface, impossible to see until it was already too late. It was born for night battles, and the Imperial Japanese Navy knew it. On Japanese destroyers and cruisers, crews trained relentlessly for the kind of fight the West considered outdated. Torpedo warfare at night. They memorized firing angles, studied ship silhouettes, and learned to calculate ranges using nothing but instinct and experience. They didn't need radar. They didn't need spotlights. When the Long Lance left its tubes, it did so silently, invisibly, and with a warhead powerful enough to cripple a heavy cruiser in one strike. During the battles around Savo Island, Tassafaronga, and countless smaller clashes throughout the Solomons, American sailors found themselves trapped in a nightmare they couldn't explain. Radar picked up nothing. Submarines were nowhere near. And yet ships were vanishing, sometimes minutes after sighting a Japanese destroyer on the horizon. The U.S. Navy would only understand the truth years later. By then, dozens of ships had been lost, thousands of sailors killed, and the myth of Japanese naval inferiority shattered. The Imperial Navy had not only developed the world's most advanced torpedo, they had mastered the art of using it with lethal precision. As the Americans struggled to explain the sudden devastation hitting their fleets, Japanese destroyer captains were executing attacks with an ease born of ruthless training. They slipped through the night like hunters, their ships running dark, engines tuned to the quietest possible settings. When they found an Allied formation, they didn't rush in guns blazing. They positioned themselves carefully, sometimes holding fire for nearly an hour as they waited for the perfect angle. Then, with a quick order and a flash of sparks from the tubes, a spread of long lances shot into the black water, each one a silent promise of destruction. Allied ships rarely even knew they were targeted. Lookouts might catch a faint glimmer or disturbance in the water, but by then it was already too late. The torpedoes were too fast, too long-ranged, and too silent, and when they struck, the explosions were monstrous, often far larger than anything American sailors had seen before. The Type 93 carried a warhead that could rip open the entire side of a cruiser, flooding multiple compartments instantly and knocking out power in seconds. If the hit was near the engine rooms, the ship might never recover, dead in the water and burning as crewmen scrambled for survival. The Battle of Tassafaronga became the moment the U.S. Navy finally realized something was horribly wrong. 4 American cruisers charged toward a much smaller Japanese force, expecting an easy victory. Within minutes, 3 U.S. cruisers were crippled, and one, USS Northampton, went down in flames. The Japanese force lost only a single destroyer. American officers reviewing the battle reports were stunned. Their radar had spotted the enemy first. Their guns were heavier. Their formation was stronger. And yet they had been savaged by a weapon they still refused to believe existed. In truth, the Americans weren't just fighting Japanese destroyers. They were fighting a different philosophy of naval warfare. While the U.S. and British navies had spent decades perfecting gunnery and armor, the Japanese had obsessed over one thing: striking first and decisively with torpedoes. The Long Lance was the crown jewel of that doctrine, and in the hands of well-trained crews, it became a nightmare that reshaped the Pacific War. But nothing lasts forever. By 1943, the tide began to turn. American radar improved dramatically, allowing ships to detect Japanese formations long before they could approach firing range. New tactics emphasized evasive maneuvers and wider formations, forcing Japanese torpedo attacks to cross longer distances. And as the war dragged on, Japan struggled to replace its skilled destroyer crews, the same men who had spent years mastering the Long Lance in peace. When those veterans were lost, their replacements lacked the same precision, the same calm, the same lethal timing. Even so, the Type 93 continued to claim victims. In 1944, during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, and later at Surigao Strait, American ships still encountered the shocking reach of the Long Lance. But by then, the element of mystery was gone. The U.S. Navy understood the torpedo's capabilities, and the Japanese fleet was shrinking fast. Carriers, battleships, and destroyers that might have launched devastating spreads of torpedoes were vanishing faster than they could be replaced. The end came not because the Long Lance failed, but because the Navy that wielded it was being crushed under the weight of industrial war. The world's most advanced torpedo had been born in a nation whose factories and fuel supplies couldn't support a long conflict. As Japan's ships burned and sank across the Pacific, many of the surviving Type 93s were scuttled, dumped overboard, or destroyed in their own tubes to prevent catastrophic explosions during air raids. Only after the war, when American intelligence teams finally inspected Japanese torpedo factories and captured technical documents, did the truth become undeniable. The Type 93 had not just been good, it had been decades ahead of its time. Its range, speed, and stealth shocked American engineers who realized the U.S. Navy had fought half the war against a weapon it didn't even understand. For the sailors who faced the Long Lance in the dark waters of the Solomons, the discovery came too late. Many had died, believing they were unlucky, or outmaneuvered, or caught off guard. In reality, they had faced the most lethal torpedo of the Second World War, a weapon designed with such precision and ingenuity that even the world's most powerful navy could not stop it in time. And so, the Long Lance fades into history, not the most famous weapon of the Pacific, but one of the most devastating. A silent killer that struck from beyond the horizon, rewriting the rules of naval warfare and reminding the world that the ocean hides its deadliest secrets beneath the surface. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate you being here. If you enjoyed the video, a like and a subscription go a long way and help me keep making these World War II stories.